There are places on this earth that do not want you to exist. They are not merely geographical locations composed of dirt, roots, and stone. They are predatory entities, ancient and hungry, that seem to possess a consciousness distinct from the natural world. You are listening to Nocturnal Ledger, and today we are opening a file that has been stained with the tears of thousands and shrouded in a silence so heavy it can crush the human soul. This is not a legend derived from campfire stories or internet creepypastas. This is a narrative built upon police logs, geological surveys, historical literature, and the terrified testimonies of those who walked into the abyss and, by some miracle, walked back out. We are traveling to the foot of Japan's most sacred peak, Mount Fuji, to enter the Jukai, the Sea of Trees, known to the world as Aokigahara. To understand the horror of Aokigahara, you must first understand the deception of its beauty. From a distance, the forest looks like a rolling ocean of lush green, a 35 square kilometer expanse of tranquility resting in the shadow of the majestic Fuji. But beauty is often a mask for something far more sinister. The ground beneath this forest is not soil. It is rock. Hardened, porous lava from the massive eruption of Mount Nagaoyama in the year 864. This geological violence created a floor that is uneven, riddled with hollow caves, and covered in moss that hides treacherous gaps, capable of swallowing a person whole. The trees here do not grow straight, because they cannot penetrate the lava rock deeply. Their roots snake across the surface like thousands of tangled veins, twisting and wrapping around anything they touch, giving the impression that the forest itself is organic, moving, and constricting. But the physical danger is secondary to the atmospheric dread that permeates this place. Documented reports from forestry workers and geological surveyors, dating back decades, speak of an unnatural silence. The hardened lava is porous, filled with millions of tiny holes that absorb sound. In Aokigahara, you do not hear birds. You do not hear the wind. You hear only your own heartbeat and the crunch of your boots on the moss. It is a sensory deprivation chamber constructed by nature. And in that silence, the human mind begins to fracture. While the forest has been a place of asceticism and folklore for centuries, the modern era of darkness truly began to fester in the 1950s. It was during this post-war period that the forest transitioned from a place of wild mythology to a specific destination for the tragic. In 1960, the author Seicho Matsumoto published his novel Kuroi Jukai, or Tower of Waves. The story concludes with a romanticized depiction of the protagonist ending her life in the Sea of Trees. It was a piece of fiction, but its impact was devastatingly real. Following the book's publication and its adaptation into television, police in Yamanashi Prefecture noted a terrifying spike in one-way trips to the forest. The book was found in the abandoned cars of victims so often that it became a grim cliché in police reports. It was as if the fiction had unlocked a dark suggestion in the collective consciousness of a nation, turning a geological wonder into a graveyard. However, the darkness of Aokigahara predates the 1950s. We must look further back into the desperate times of famine in Japan's history to understand the origin of the entities said to reside here. The Yurei. During eras of extreme poverty, families were sometimes forced into the brutal practice of Ubasute. This was the act of carrying an elderly or infirm relative into a remote mountain or forest environment and leaving them there to die of exposure or starvation, thereby reducing the number of mouths to feed. Local folklore insists that Aokigahara was a site for Ubasute. The terror of those abandoned souls dying slowly, alone, betrayed by their own blood, consumed by hunger and fear, is said to have soaked into the very lava rock. In Japanese spirituality, a violent or emotional death, especially one filled with rage or sorrow, creates a Yurei, a vengeful spirit tethered to the physical plane. These are not the passive ghosts of Western Gothic romance. These are entities of pure malice. They are believed to be the white, shimmering figures seen darting between the Japanese cypress trees, the voices that whisper from the shadows, beckoning the living to step off the path. The existence of these spirits is not merely a superstition held by the uneducated. It is a palpable fear acknowledged by the very men tasked with policing the forest. Every year since 1970, the local police, fire brigades, and volunteers have conducted what is known as the annual body search. It is a grim harvest. In the early 2000s, the numbers were staggering, with over 100 bodies found in a single year. But it is the procedure regarding these bodies that reveals the true depth of the fear. According to police protocols in the local precinct, a corpse found in the forest cannot be left alone. When a body is recovered and brought back to the station, it is placed in a special room, but the body is never locked in and left for the night. It is a documented tradition that one of the police officers or forestry workers must sleep in the room with the corpse. They believe that if the body is left alone, the Yurei of the deceased will scream through the night, thrashing around, and the body itself may move, dragging itself through the corridors, seeking company. The officers often play John Ken Pon, or rock, paper, scissors, to decide who has to endure the terrifying vigil. This is not a campfire story. This is a ritual performed by hardened law enforcement officers who have seen the worst of humanity, yet still fear the spiritual contamination of Aokigahara. Witness testimony from these officers describes chilling phenomena. They speak of the magnetic anomalies of the forest. The rich iron deposits in the volcanic soil render compasses useless. The needle spins wildly, refusing to find north. While science explains this as a geological quirk, for those lost in the woods, it feels like the forest is deliberately confusing them, turning them around, trapping them in a labyrinth of green. Hikers who have ventured off the trail report their GPS devices malfunctioning, batteries draining from full to zero in minutes, and a sudden, overwhelming onset of nausea and dizziness that vanishes the moment they step back onto the designated path. Let us delve into the specific account of a man we will call Kiyomyo, a Buddhist monk who set up a makeshift temple on the outskirts of the forest to pray for the souls trapped within. In an interview documented by paranormal researchers in the late 90s, Kiyomyo described the sounds of the forest at night. He stated that the silence of the day is replaced by a cacophony of sorrow after sundown. He reported hearing distinct, guttural screams that did not sound like any animal native to Japan. He described hearing names being called out, names of people who were not there. He spoke of a pull, a physical sensation of being dragged toward the deep jukai, as if the forest were inhaling. He claimed to have seen shadows that moved against the wind, dark masses that would coalesce into the shape of a human before dissolving into the tree line. One of the most harrowing aspects of the Aokigahara phenomenon is the physical evidence left behind by the undecided. When you walk the trails today, you will see police signs with messages like, "Your life is a precious gift from your parents, and please consult the police before you decide to die." But beyond the signs, if you look into the density of the trees, you might see plastic ribbons, tape, blue, pink, white ribbons, tied to the trunks of trees, trailing off into the darkness. These are the lifelines of the ambivalent. People who walked into the forest with the intent to end their lives, but brought a roll of tape to mark their path, just in case they changed their minds. Following these ribbons is a journey into the heart of despair. Investigative journalists and YouTubers who have followed these trails often find them ending abruptly. Sometimes they end at a clearing with a flattened patch of moss, a tent, and a pile of belongings, a pair of shoes, neatly placed side by side, a backpack containing a license, a family photo, a half-eaten meal. The person is gone, their fate unknown. Did they walk back out? Or did they untie the ribbon and venture deeper, where the foliage is so thick it blocks the sun entirely? There is a specific account from a group of hikers in 2010 who found a campsite deep in a restricted zone. The tent was covered in mildew, suggesting it had been there for years. Inside, they found a cassette recorder. When they played the tape, expecting a final message or a will, they instead heard minutes of heavy breathing, followed by a sudden, violent sound of tearing fabric and a voice that did not sound human, whispering a string of nonsensical syllables that grew louder and more aggressive until the tape abruptly stopped. The hikers turned the tape over to the local authorities, but no identification was ever made. The contents of that recording have never been released to the public. But the hikers described the voice as sounding like wet leaves grinding together. The psychological impact on the survivors, those who went in and were rescued, is profound. Interviews with survivors often share a common, disturbing thread. They do not speak of making a rational decision to enter the forest. They speak of a trance. One survivor, a salaryman from Tokyo, described it as hearing a frequency that drowned out the noise of the city. He claimed he didn't remember the train ride to Yamanashi. He didn't remember walking from the station. He only woke up when he was already deep in the woods, the silence pressing against his ears, with a rope in his hands that he didn't remember buying. He described the feeling of being watched by 1,000 eyes in the trees. He felt that the forest was disappointed in him for waking up. This aligns with the spiritual theory that the Yurei are parasitic. They feed on depression and negative energy, amplifying it, pushing the victim toward a cliff edge they might not have walked off otherwise. We must also discuss the suicide patrols. These are local volunteers who walk the forest boundaries, looking for people who seem out of place. Men in business suits, people carrying nothing but a small bag, or those who simply look lost in thought. One patrolman, in a documentary interview, shared a story that chills the blood. He spotted a young woman sitting on a log, staring at the ground. He approached her, speaking gently, asking if she wanted water. She didn't respond. He got closer and touched her shoulder. She collapsed. She was not a living woman. She was a corpse that had been propped up, stiff with rigor mortis. But the patrolman swore that from a distance, he saw her head turn. He saw her shoulders heave as if she were sobbing. Was it a trick of the light? A hallucination brought on by the stress of the job? Or does the forest replay the final moments of the dead, projecting their image like a tragic hologram for the living to find? The horror of Aokigahara is also found in the mundane items that accumulate there. It is a museum of the forgotten. Heaps of clothes, rotting comic books, empty sake bottles, and dolls. Yes, dolls. There is a tradition in some parts of Japan to leave a doll to keep the spirits company. But in the Jukai, these dolls take on a grotesque quality. Moss grows over their plastic faces. Insects nest in their artificial hair. They are often found nailed to trees upside down, a curse mark, or arranged in circles. Paranormal investigators suggest these are not gifts for the dead, but wards left by practitioners of the occult who view the forest as a battery of dark energy. They believe the forest is a thin place, a tear in the veil between this world and the underworld, and they use it to conduct rituals that require the fuel of suffering. Let us consider the skeptics for a moment. Science tells us that the feeling of dread is caused by infrasound, low-frequency sound waves generated by wind passing through the hollow lava tubes, frequencies that are below the range of human hearing, but can cause anxiety, sorrow, and hallucinations. Science tells us the compasses fail because of magnetic iron. Science tells us people get lost because the landscape is repetitive and visual landmarks are non-existent. But science cannot explain the sheer volume of coincidences. It cannot explain why people with no prior history of mental illness feel the urge to travel hundreds of miles to this specific location. It cannot explain why the suicide rate in the surrounding towns is statistically higher than the national average, or why drivers on the highway passing the forest report seeing pale figures standing on the shoulder, staring at the cars, only to vanish in the rear-view mirror. There is a documented police report from 1994 involving a car found in the parking lot near the Wind Cave entrance. The car had been there for weeks, gathering dust. The police traced the license plate to a man in Osaka. When they opened the trunk, they didn't find a body. Dozens of maps of different forests across Japan. But Aokigahara was the only one circled in red ink, over and over again, until the paper was torn. On the passenger seat was a diary. The entries were normal until the last week. The handwriting deteriorated into frantic scribbles. The last entry read simply, "The trees are calling. They promise it won't hurt. They say they are lonely." The man was never found. His car remained a sentinel in the parking lot, one of many that sit there for months, tires flattening, waiting for a driver who has become part of the route system. The locals of the villages surrounding the forest, specifically those in Narusawa and Fujikawa-Guchiko, live with a pervasive sense of unease. They raise their children with strict rules. Never enter the forest past the first 100 meters. Never take anything from the forest. And never, ever look at the forest at night. They tell stories of the Yurei Gumo, or ghost spiders, spirits that manifest as shifting mists that entangle travelers. They speak of the forest expanding. Old maps show the boundaries of the Jukai being smaller than they are today. While geologists say the forest is stable, the locals believe it is growing, inch by inch, feeding on the bodies to fuel its expansion, reaching out toward the villages like a slow-moving cancer. Even the flora contributes to the nightmare. There is a specific type of mold that grows on the shoes and clothes of the deceased. It is a vibrant, unnatural white. When search parties find a site, they often see this white spotting before they see the body. It acts as a beacon. Forensic entomologists study the insects of the forest to determine time of death, and they have noted that the decomposition process in Aokigahara is different. The temperature in the lava caves is consistently near freezing, even in summer. This can preserve bodies in a mummified state, creating grotesque statues that stare blindly into the canopy for years. You could walk past a hollow log and not realize that the gray, withered shape inside is a human being who went missing a decade ago. In the mid-2000s, a team of paranormal investigators from the United States conducted a night investigation in the forest, authorized by a local guide. They brought thermal imaging cameras, EVP recorders, and spirit boxes. Their findings were disturbing. In an area known for high activity, their thermal cameras picked up heat signatures shaped like small humans, children crouching at the base of trees. When they approached, the heat signatures vanished instantly. On their audio recorders, they captured a voice speaking in a dialect of Japanese that had not been commonly used since the Edo period. The voice asked, "Where is the path?" This suggests that the spirits trapped there are not just from the modern suicide epidemic, but layer upon layer of history. The abandoned elders of the Ubasute, the lost travelers of the feudal era, and the modern tragic souls all occupying the same space, all lost in the same eternal darkness. The most terrifying aspect of the Aokigahara phenomena is the contagion of memory. Those who find the bodies are often traumatized for life. There are accounts of forestry workers who quit their jobs after a single season, plagued by nightmares of the faces they saw. One worker described finding a young man who had hanged himself. In the man's pocket was a picture of a baby. The worker said that every time he closed his eyes, he saw the man's expression not of peace, but of regret. He saw claw marks on the man's neck, self-inflicted, suggesting that in the final moments, the survival instinct kicked in, and he tried to free himself, but it was too late. The forest had claimed him. This is the reality that the romanticized movies and novels do not show. The regret, the panic, the ugly, visceral reality of death. As we traverse the history of this haunted landscape, we must acknowledge the tape of the curse, a rumor that circulated in the Japanese underground horror community in the early 2000s. It was said that a camcorder was found near the Dragon Palace cave. The footage supposedly showed a group of friends joking and laughing as they hiked off trail. As the sun began to set, the mood shifted. The camera operator began to pan frantically, claiming he saw someone following them. The friends denied it. Then, the audio began to distort. A low hum drowned out their voices. The final shot of the footage, according to the legend, showed the group standing in a circle, facing outward, holding hands, looking terrified at something surrounding them that the camera couldn't see. The tape cuts to black with the sound of a woman weeping. Whether this tape exists or is merely an urban legend, born from the forest's reputation, is debated, but the description aligns perfectly with the psychological deterioration reported by survivors. The haunting of Aokigahara is not just about ghosts. It is about the reflection of the human condition. It is a place where the social pressure, the isolation, and the despair of modern society accumulate. Japan is a nation that values honor and collective harmony, and for some, the burden becomes too great. The forest offers a dark embrace, a place to disappear where no one will judge them, where they can become nothing. But the tragedy is that they do not become nothing. They become part of the lore. They become the monsters in the stories told to scare children. They become the cold spots that hikers walk through. They become the static on the radio. Even the trees themselves seem to bear witness. The cypress and hemlock trees in the Jukai grow on top of the lava, their roots exposed. These roots often resemble twisted limbs, torsos, and grasping fingers. Pareidolia. The human tendency to see faces in inanimate objects runs rampant here. But is it just the mind playing tricks? Or has the forest absorbed so much life that it has begun to mimic the shape of humanity? Some spiritualists believe that trees can absorb the energy of their environment. If a tree grows in a place soaked in blood and sorrow, does that tree become corrupted? Does the wood itself hold a memory? There are stories of woodcarvers who refuse to use timber sourced from the thinning of the Aokigahara forest, claiming that the wood screams when cut, or that the grain forms disturbing patterns that look like eyes. In recent years, the local government has stopped publishing the number of bodies found in the forest in an attempt to stop the glamorization of the site. They have installed security cameras at the entrances. They have increased patrols. They have trained taxi drivers to spot potential victims' passengers who ask to be dropped off at the forest entrance with no return ticket and no hiking gear. These measures have saved lives. But the forest is vast. It has 1,000 entrances for those who are determined. And the silence continues to call. Imagine yourself there now. It is twilight. The sun has dipped below the rim of Mount Fuji, casting long, distorted shadows through the sea of trees. The temperature drops rapidly. You are walking on the trail, and you see a ribbon. It is blue. It looks fresh. You follow it, compelled by a morbid curiosity. The ribbon weaves through the dense undergrowth, over mossy hummocks, around the twisted roots. The air gets colder. The sound of the wind dies away. You hear a twig snap behind you. You turn, but there is nothing but the gray trunks of the hemlocks. You turn back to the ribbon, and you see it ends at a pair of shoes. Just shoes. A whisper right next to your ear, intimate and terrifying. Don't go back. This is the reality of Aokigahara. It is a place where the veil is thin, where the past and present bleed together, where the geology and the theology of horror intersect. It is a ledger of lives cut short, a nocturnal record of humanity's darkest moments. The spirits, the Yurei, the energies, whatever name you give them, they are there. They are waiting in the silence. They are the watchers in the woods. As we close this file on the Nocturnal ledger, we are left with a chilling question. We know that matter cannot be created or destroyed, only changed. We know that energy works the same way. When a human life is extinguished in a place of such profound isolation and geological anomaly, where does that energy go? Does it dissipate into the universe, or does it get trapped in the porous lava rock, recycling endlessly, adding to the weight of the air, waiting for a sensitive mind to pass by so it can reach out and touch the living? The forest stands there today, under the shadow of the mountain, silent, green, waiting. If you ever find yourself in the Yamanashi prefecture, and you see the sign for the Sea of Trees, remember the ribbons, remember the silence, and keep driving, because some ledgers are better left unread. This has been a documentation of the true horror of Aokigahara. Stay in the light, and do not answer the whisper in the dark.